Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual St John's College, to the last seminar in our 40 Years of Women series. This project was established to coincide with the 40th anniversary of admission of women to St John's, and it was an opportunity for us to look back on the path that we've trodden since 1979, and also to take stock of where we still need to go on the path to equality and diversity. Unfortunately, this particular event had to be postponed because of the pandemic. And whilst we still are unable to meet in the real world, we didn't want it to have to wait any longer. So we are all here tonight and very much looking forward to a discussion. So although it's 41 years now since women were first admitted to St John's, we also have the opportunity, I think, of marking the centenary of 100 years of women being admitted to Oxford for degrees. And also this seminar coincides with the 25th anniversary of the Disability Discrimination Act, which has subsequently been subsumed into the Equality Act. So it's my great pleasure this evening to have with us an important panel of alumni from across the years. Ruth Everard, who read law, Deb Sanders, who read modern languages, and Helen Willis, who read experimental psychology. I also have with us Kate Dornick, who is our Fellow for Equality and Tutor for Economics. She's going to chair a question and answer session after the main panel event, and our Senior Tutor, Matthew Nichols, a classicist. Just a few housekeeping items. If you would, during the panel event and afterwards, post your questions in the Q&A chat. Kate will read them out after the event. And also one other thing, if anyone would like to see subtitles, we invite you to use the closed caption button. It's something we've not yet used ourselves, but we very much hope that that's going to be helpful for those of you who need it. So with no further ado, let me introduce the panel. In fact, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you. We had a pre-event, we had a pre-meeting last week, and I must say I was very cheered to hear from these three alumni of what was a fairly positive experience when they were here at St John's. I hope, nonetheless, we've continued to move ahead, and just this week we've taken back control of our new lodge, which of course had a primary aim of providing better disabled access. And also just last week, the university issued new advice for supporting disabled students. And if any of you have not looked at that advice, I do recommend it. And there's some wonderful video material on that site. But with no further ado, let me perhaps one by one in approximate order of matriculation invite the panelists to tell you a little bit about themselves and what they're now doing. So can I start with you, Ruth? If you'd like to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's great to be here. Yes, Maggie, as you say, I read law. I matriculated in '99. I shall mention my disability, because if we were all meeting in person, then it would be very obvious. I was born with a condition called spinal muscular atrophy, which basically means that I am very weak. You can probably see here that my shoulders are askew. That's because my spine is curved due to weakness. I use a power chair, and I was really fortunate to be the first child under the age of 2 to be in an elevating power chair on time for my development. So my CV is painfully normal, normal for St John's. So I came to St John's, read law, ended up in the city because I couldn't think of anything else to do, and so qualified as a solicitor with Clifford Chance, and then got headhunted into a boutique hedge fund firm, which is where I might have stayed had it not been for the fact that the social enterprise that my parents were running, making the power chairs that had enabled me, was in need of new blood. So I packed up my London flat and headed to Cambridge, for anyone. And now I run a manufacturing social enterprise, which is as weird and complicated as it sounds. So I've left legal practice behind me, and that's what I do now.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Now I think, Deb, you came up a couple of years just before Ruth. Tell us what you've been doing since.
Thank you, Maggie. So I read modern languages at St John's from 97 to 2001. And then I did a master's in linguistics at the University of York for a year, which I really enjoyed. And then moved into reference publishing in a couple of editorial roles, back in the city of Oxford, but nothing to do with the university, and just because that's where I found a job. And using my languages passively a little bit to start with in that company. And then when I was ready for a change, somewhat unexpectedly, I moved to work in the university, particularly at Somerville College, and then in various professional services roles in the Central University. Working for Oxford, or indeed any university, was not something I had planned or expected, but actually many of my roles have suited me very well and played to my strengths. And at the moment, I work as a data architect for the University of Oxford, which involves helping to design administrative processes and the IT systems which support them to make sure we can capture the data which people need and provide the data back to people in a way which is useful and understandable. And that actually uses many of the same skills as my languages and linguistics. And while I'm very proud of my academic and career achievements, I actually think that one of my greatest achievements to date has been the depth and richness of the many wonderful relationships I have with friends and family, and indeed with work colleagues. And it's taken me a huge amount of work and learning and effort and pain to develop those relationships and to learn how to do them. Because 3.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with an autism spectrum condition at the age in my late 30s. And while I was diagnosed only then, it's a lifelong condition, so I've had it all the time. And I've since diagnosis, or since thinking about being assessed for autism, I've been on a journey of rediscovering myself, re-understanding myself in the light of both the strengths and the challenges which my condition brings. And that's taken a huge amount of energy and emotion, and it's been life-changing in largely positive and very helpful ways, but also has had a huge impact on me. And I'm still on that journey, and particularly reassessing aspects of life where I felt like I've failed, I've been a failure, or haven't achieved my potential, actually reinterpreting those aspects of life as actually being often massive successes, given my autism and some of the challenges which it brings.
Thank you very much, Deb. And now Helen, who I, of course, knew as an undergraduate. She came up in this century.
Thank you. So I matriculated in 2010 at St John's, and I stayed on another year to do a master's in neuroscience. I then undertook a PhD at University College London, and where I actually researched how deafness affects the brain. And that's because I was actually completely deafened by meningitis when I was a toddler. And I became the 51st person in the UK to actually receive a cochlear implant, where I was able to regain access to the world of sound and actually regain my own voice. So I became really interested in how deafness interacts with the brain. And then because of my doctoral research, I became very interested in stress management and the impact of cognitive load on the brain. So I took on further professional training, and I actually qualified in hip therapy, breath coaching, and a range of other therapies. And these therapies now form the foundations of my business, my current job as a stress management consultant, where I'm providing education, advice, and treatment for relieving chronic stress.
Thank you very much, Helen. So maybe I can just ask all of you now just to tell me something about your experience at Oxford. What was it like for you? So who wants to go first? Why don't we stick with you, Helen, because you've been here most recently.
Be delighted to go ahead. So I'm glad to say that it was actually everything that I hoped it would be. Was overall a very, very positive experience. It was a very inclusive, welcoming environment to be in, and it was a delight to be here. The only downside though is because of my deafness, I'm constantly having to compensate for missing sound information. So that extra workload on the brain took its toll, and over, any positive experience, there was always a shadow of tiredness. So I had to struggle a lot with fatigue in the evenings. They became a balancing act as to whether I go out and socialise and go to the societies, or whether I just have a quiet evening, my hearing aids switch off, and it was just rest my brain. So that's the only downside. Otherwise, as I say, it was a very positive experience. It's been a dream come true. I've been wanting to go to Oxford since the age of 9.
Can you say a little bit about what you found helpful then? Well, why was the experience positive?
So overall, it was the general attitude of everyone in the Disability Advisory Centre and also in the college. So they made sure that the support, all the support I needed. So I had note takers. Those are the main things I had. And I was unusual in that I had 2 note takers. I had an electronic note taker and a manual note taker. And that's very unusual because most of the time you had one or the other, and everyone thought it was overkill. But the electronic note taker gave me a live transcript of what was being said in the lectures. And the manual note taker provided bullet point summaries of what was being said. Because it's all very well having this beautiful transcript of everything that was being said, but then you end up with pages. You can imagine an hour and a half lecture, 2 hours even, you get pages, and you can't use that. And I'm spending so much time sort of watching the lecturer, trying to understand what's going on, reading the transcript, keeping an eye on my manual note taker that I can't hit my own notes. So those are the main things. And the college made damn sure that the note takers were there and ready for time. And the other thing was really helpful was they let me come in early before Freshers Week in the first year. They let me move in early and make sure I had everything settled. I was properly moved in because I had that anchor. So I was able to really hit the road running despite everything, because Freshers Week is crazy enough and nerve-wracking enough and exciting enough. So having that foundation there, knowing it's all good, I've got my room sorted, I can just come, especially because I needed those quiet times, just sit in silence with my hearing aids switched off. So it's just that general attitude that was just so accommodating and allowed that to actually happen.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Ruth, can you tell us a little bit about your experience, which was 20 years before?
Absolutely. I mean, I had the same, the attitude was phenomenally helpful. I think, the college is such a diverse place, actually. And so there was that welcoming meritocracy. You must have made it here by merit, and so we will accommodate whatever. I also came to college early, although I had a dry run in the Easter of the year before. I had a year out between A-levels and coming to college, which was slightly enforced by circumstances, but was the best thing that could have happened to me. And in the Easter, it must have been at the very end of Hillary term, I came, and I see that S.J. King is with us, and she may remember me visiting and spending 3 days just doing a dry run, just practicing, going to lectures, doing all the things that I was going to need to do and needed to work from the outset when I arrived in Freshers Week, so that we could identify any practical problems beforehand and put them right beforehand. And the other thing, I think anyone with a disability knows that having resources available is the right resources at the right time is absolutely the key to success. And I think St John's had that that in abundance. I remember my occupational therapist was over the moon, because she was expecting to have to apply for funding, and maybe we'd get the equipment in by Christmas of my first year, and college was able just to put in all the equipment that I needed. So it was there at the outset, and those things really helped. And it's all to do with the practicality. For me, I'm very fortunate in that my disability is one which is entirely a logistical problem. It's not something which is mentally tiring to overcome. If I'm physically in the room, then the problem is solved. I don't have to work harder once I'm physically, I have physical access. And I chose St John's because of the variety of places within the college that I could get to, so that the hall was accessible. The whole of college, most of the rooms that I would need to get to, most of the places I would need to get to for college life were accessible, and everything else you can work around. The great thing about the tutorial system is that you can hold. I had some of my tutorials in my own room. My tutor came to me, and you can do that in a tute system. But I chose St John's so that the important places were ones I could get to. And when I say important, I mean the things when being absent from them would detract from my experience of college life.
Thank you very much. Deb, obviously your diagnosis was relatively recently, so unlike Helen and Ruth, you didn't come to St John's kind of thinking you were going to have any problems. Do you want to say a little bit about your experience?
So I had both positive and less positive experiences, although I should say I don't think the less positives were the fault of St John's. I think they were to do with a condition that I didn't know I had. The things I struggled with, as I sort of alluded to earlier, were largely the social aspects of life. While I was never a complete loner or anything, I didn't really know how to do two-way reciprocal relationships of any kind. So I had lots of superficial friendly relationships with people, but didn't really have any deeper connections, and didn't really know how to, I guess, initiate social interactions, inviting people for dinner and so on. So I became increasingly aware that people seemed to be making friends, even having romantic relationships, and I was struggling with even just with friendships and with sort of doing things socially with people. Also, my subject, languages, was actually very literature based, and studying literature requires suspension of disbelief. It requires understanding about people and how they relate, imagination, interpretation of metaphor and allegory, all of which I really struggled with. And so I found that quite hard. It was much better when I studied linguistics and also studied literature, which was all about the fact that it was a construct. I got on much better when literature was talking about the fact that it wasn't real. So those were some of the challenges that I experienced. On the positive side, in hindsight, I think the very structured nature of my studies really helped. External structure helps me a lot, which is common for people on the spectrum. And as a linguist, I had a lot of contact time with tutors, classes and tutorials, and lots of relatively small pieces of work with defined deadlines. So I think that helped. And in fact, having ready-made relationships, for all that they were largely superficial for me, also really helped. There were people to hang out with, there were people to interact with. And I struggled much more after university in what I call the real world, working life and the rest of life, when my mental health became more and more affected by the fact that I didn't have deep social connections, and I was having to structure all of my time outside work. So I think the tutorial setup and the small class system probably actually helped me to cope, although I didn't realise that at the time.
Thank you. Well, you've touched a bit on what you found difficult. I wonder maybe the others could just join in a little bit. What were the things you found difficult? Because you've spoken very positively, but were there times that really it was difficult? I mean, Helen, you talked about being tired, but were there other issues?
I think it was more the fact, because even though I've got a physical disability, and that's very obvious, I mean, everyone can see a cochlear implant on my head, no one really saw what was going on behind the scenes, and just my brain just constantly working overtime, and that had a real impact in terms of processing time. So for example, I had 25% extra time on exams, and everyone was like, that doesn't make any sense, you just can't hear, you know, you can still write, can't you? And I was like, that's not the point. So people never quite understand that, and how could they? You know, they need to live through it and actually be in that disability to really understand that extra load on the brain. So that was quite difficult trying to justify and explain. And thankfully, the university was brilliant. It's just other people, you know, fellow students, and even though they were very welcoming, sometimes they just don't get it. And that can be quite difficult, and sometimes having to drop out and opt out. Like, for example, go, oh, let's go for a drink in the local pub or in the bar. And I'm going, can we not? Can you perhaps go to my room where it's a bit quieter? You know, it's just anything to reduce the load. So it's just that gap in understanding of, yes, I can't hear particularly well, but it's actually the extra stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Like sometimes I try to hide it because I don't want to be a burden on people. And I also put a lot of pressure on myself because I feel that the college took a great leap of faith in taking me on, and I don't want to let them down. I want to show that they were right in choosing me. You know, I deserved my place, and I put a lot of pressure on myself. So I keep that kind of storm facade, and I try to explain, but sometimes it's just that gap, and it's very hard to bridge it. And I was trying to work it out myself, which is one of the reasons why I did my PhD research on cognitive load management in the brain. I was constantly thinking, am I doing something wrong? You know, why am I finding it so difficult? But it was that language processing delay. It takes me 4 times longer, I notice, to write a standard essay. So someone would go, oh, I did it in a day, and they go, it took me 4 days. We had the exact same reading list. I get, you know, I always meet my deadlines, but it's just like constantly being that one step behind and trying to run to keep up. That was quite very difficult for me.
Can you tell us in really lay terms a little bit about the findings of your research on cognitive processing?
So what I was trying to do was develop the best clinical tests for actually measuring the extra work the brain has to put in to understand sound from a cochlear implant, because cochlear implants are amazing technology. Don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful. I wouldn't be here today without it. But it's just working on actually measuring the extra work the brain has to put in. And my research was able to show that yes, extra work is being put in, which is somewhat obvious, but we never had empirical data really showing that. And not only that, it's not just in noisy situations that cochlear implant users have to work harder in. It's in quiet. So even in perfect optimal listening conditions, we're still having to put in that extra bit of effort. And that adds up over time, which is why I became interested in stress management, because, you know, extra loads on the brain just builds up and accumulates. And before you realize it, it becomes a store that breaks the camel's back. And the body goes into a bit of a breakdown, and health definitely deteriorates. And my health began to deteriorate. So the stronger my workload became, the extra work on my brain, the more my body began to deteriorate. But it was very subtle, so I didn't notice it particularly in my undergraduate years. It was more in my postgraduate years when the workload really went sky high, that you notice the effect of stress on the body. So my research showed that extra load, and that was really surprising for everyone. So I was very fortunate that my experiments work to show that in quiet.
Deb, you're obviously very verbal. I mean, you know, you're a linguist, but is language processing also somewhat difficult for you?
For me personally, I don't think language processing is an issue. It is definitely for many people on the spectrum, not for me. However, the cognitive load, the brain load that Helen talks about actually is also something that's very true for me. So I process most things consciously, although as I grow and mature, then more of it becomes second nature and more subconscious, whereas many people are doing a lot of processing subconsciously in daily life. People on the spectrum are doing most of that or much of that consciously. And so that takes a huge amount of mental energy, emotional energy. So I guess maybe a bit like Helen's describing in terms of the energy in terms of processing language. It's everything. It's interaction, it's sound, it's sight, it's everything. It's all senses take processing. And so that's something I experience. I get mentally overloaded very easily every day, and have to employ lots of techniques to try to help to release the pent up tension in my body all through the day. But by the end of each day, I'm really tired, I'm overloaded, I frequently experience burnout. And those are common things for people on the spectrum.
Thank you. Ruth, I think you described something very different about your language processing.
Yeah, so I have the advantage that my condition comes with an unexplained but provable. There's a study showing that it's there, but no one knows why. Aptitude for language and logic. So people with SMA are often lawyers or journalists. It's a I don't know if this is what you were alluding to, Maggie. So I actually overcome my disability using those aptitudes and those skills, those extra abilities I have. I get physically very tired because my body, I mean, I probably appear like I'm actually sitting up here. I can't sit up unsupported. I'm floppy like a newborn. So to live an adult life, to move around in the way that you do when you're at college or in a job is absolutely exhausting. When I was a child, we used to have the difficulty that I would be physically exhausted, but my brain would still be going. And so I used to have maths lessons in which I was required to go to sleep. My dad would just push and push and push on maths. So I was doing algebra at the age of 8, simply because I needed my brain to get tired, because otherwise I couldn't sleep. So I've actually used, and I think we all have skills and aptitudes that come with our disability. And I think one of the, going back to what you were saying about this, about the problems and things that were difficult, I think people made assumptions about what I might need and made allowances for me in areas that I didn't need them. And as you say, Helen, didn't understand the actual reality. So still took offense when he said, you know what, I'm not coming to the pub. But I had tutors who maybe made allowances for me where they shouldn't have done, and I should have been pushed on those skills that I had in abundance. One of the things that the Law Society has actually recently identified have been doing various research into disabled lawyers, and they're finding that disabled lawyers, the fee earning system in most private law firms is really unfair on disabled fee earners, because we tend to work faster. People with physical disabilities tend to work faster in order to overcome the physical obstacles. So for me particularly, I will do something that would take somebody else an hour. I'll do it in half an hour, 40 minutes, but that doesn't mean I'm available for the other half an hour, 20 minutes that's left of that hour. I need that to rest or go to the toilet. I can't pop to the loo. There is no such thing. I eat slower, I move slower, everything I do is slower, and so I need to make time for that. And as a fee earner in a law firm, I made time for that by billing less, and that was a problem. And I now, in retrospect, can see that that goes all the way back to college, where I didn't know that dynamic. I didn't understand that. And so when people were making allowances for me, I think they thought they were making allowances for my physical disability. But actually what they weren't doing was pushing me to do the things that I absolutely could do. So I was less able to really compete, because the assumption was always there that I wouldn't be able to, and it would be unfair to ask me to.
Thank you. So I think in various ways we've been touching on this sort of spectrum from hidden disability to very visible disability, but equally behind that dimension is quite a lot is hidden. I wonder what your reflections are on that sort of spectrum, and sort of whether you think it's useful or not useful for people to think about difficulties in that way.
May I think when we spoke before, Deb, you said something about, in our meeting last week, you were talking about when to tell somebody about your disability. And I have to say, I've been thinking about that, because I would love to be able to make that choice. It would be great to be able to decide when to introduce that to a conversation. I think, if I may, the only example I can think, the only time I've had the chance to do that is in online dating, where you make a decision about whether to disclose that in your profile. And then there's a question of when do you tell somebody, but actually you can manage how somebody perceives you. Whereas with a very obvious physical disability, that isn't an option. But I think maybe, I don't know what you think, Deb, but I think there's swings and roundabouts, because actually you can miss your opportunity and let it go on too long without somebody knowing, and then your impairment can inhibit what's going on, because the person is making judgments about you that maybe are unfair and are colouring how they're getting to know you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the sort of maybe the flip side of what you just said is that there's a lot of emotional energy required every time I do decide to disclose. And sometimes I have to disclose aspects of my condition repeatedly to the same people who I'm lucky I'm surrounded by really supportive, understanding, willing people who are happy to make adjustments. Even they can forget what I need, and I have to keep reminding them. So telling someone for the first time about my condition, I liken to, and other people have agreed with this, to coming out as LGBTQ, and people who identify in those identities agree that it's like that, because it's something about you that people don't know, and you don't know how they're going to respond when you tell them. And for example, for me, one of the reasonable adjustments I need is to have gaps between meetings, and I have a lot of meetings at work. I need good chunks of time to recover from all the interaction and the mental processing. My colleagues know this. I've told many of them about my condition. Many of them told them that I need this, and yet they forget. They book meetings over the time I've blocked in my diary. So I have to then ask to move the meeting or to reschedule or whatever. And they're very understanding and accommodating. And I don't every time say it's because I'm autistic, but just the act of having to ask that repeatedly makes me feel vulnerable, because as far as I can see, my colleagues seem to be coping in some sense with all these back-to-back meetings, and I just can't manage. I'll burn out if I have lots of meetings without rest. So that's one thing, I think. And like, as Helen mentioned earlier, people on the spectrum mask a lot, so make lots of effort to, as it said, pretend to be normal in big quotation marks, so that our condition isn't visible and we appear to fit in. That takes a lot of load. And I would also say that, as I experienced, hidden conditions can be so hidden that the individuals ourselves don't know we have the conditions. And I've seen two examples of this with students where they appear to be not fulfilling their academic obligations, not handing in work on time, not turning up to teaching, which has been could be perceived as a disciplinary matter, but perhaps it's out of character. But in both cases, fortunately, tutors and so on explored what was going on for those students, and each was then diagnosed with a condition which accounted for their behaviour. One, autism, and the other, very sadly, young onset dementia. This student was not able to remember his deadlines. And as I say, thankfully, those avenues were explored and the students were diagnosed. But those things could have been treated as purely disciplinary matters. And I think it's really important that if students are misbehaving or not fulfilling their obligations or acting out of character, that's approached with compassion and openness to explore with them what might be going on, and they may not even know what might be going on for them.
There's also a matter of pride. I mean, I think I know many disabled people who would rather not address it and not have it taken into account, taken into consideration, than be treated differently. And as a result, it isn't a level playing field. It can never be a level playing field because, you know, I had 50% extra time in my exams, 50% rest breaks, but that meant my 3-hour exams were 7 hours because there was also a lunch break. So I did all my finals were 7 hours each. Now that is not that doesn't make it equal to being able-bodied and doing a 3-hour exam. It was the best we could do, and that was absolutely the right thing for me. But I think I might, if you'd said, would you rather just do a 3-hour exam and see how you get on, I might have taken that up in order to do it in the exam, in schools, to go into schools with everybody else. I did all my exams separately, and that kind of pride of, now I'm going to compete in the real world, the normal world, is there.
Can I bring Helen in? Because on this spectrum of hidden to visible, I mean, your disability is fairly hidden. I mean, do you have experiences where people have kind of, got it wrong about you?
It's it goes one or two ways. Either people know immediately, and that's generally because I've ever so slightly misheard their question and answered a bit oddly, and you just see their eyebrow go up and go, "That wasn't quite what I asked. What's wrong with her?" And I'm going, "Oh God, I need to fix this." And then there'll be some that just have no idea. And I remembered I was doing some interview preparation kind of courses. It was part of my A-levels, and it was an icebreaker challenge. Just introduce yourself and then give 3 interesting facts. And I thought, well, I might as well get my deafness out there to get it out of the way. So I went blah, 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 and oh, by the way, I'm deaf. And I was the 51st person in the UK to get a cochlear implant. And the guy I was talking to literally froze and his jaw dropped and he gaped at me for the next 5 minutes. And I was going, what? That went well, and it completely destroyed the whole point of the exercise because it was meant to promote discussion. So I get the 2 extremes, and then I get all the subtle ones in between. And the one thing about my disability, in terms of, we talk about different strengths that the disability can bring us, is I'm very sensitive to non-verbals. Because I had about 1.5 years in complete silence between being deafened and getting my cochlear implant. And the only way I could understand what was going on in the world was non-verbals, watching people's body language and what they're doing. And I became very sensitive to emotional climate. So if someone's upset, boy, do I get upset too. And my family jokingly call me an empath, which sounds very Star Trek. But it's basically, I got heightened empathy kind of skills. And I could always tell if I got it slightly wrong. It's a slight subtle shift in the body language. I go, oh God, I've messed up. What have I done now? And sometimes I genuinely don't know that I had misheard. I genuinely thought I heard it correctly. So I go, blah, 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 and they go, and I'm going, oh God, and just dealing with the daily mortification. And it's, even with, people I know for years, I still get it ever so slightly wrong. And some people, thankfully, most of them cope with it extremely well and go, that wasn't quite what I said was, or they just let it pass by and deal with it. But I have had some very extreme reactions going, you're weird, I'm not talking to you anymore, and literally leave me. So it is, yeah.
Do you ever tell people how you'd like them to communicate with you?
Generally speaking, no. Because most of the time, the minute I start sort of advising or, you know, giving few suggestions, they go to the other extreme and they start over mouthing and talking really slowly. I'm going, and that actually makes it worse, ironically. Even if they're talking super fast or they've got a very heavy accent, I'd much rather they spoke naturally, because most of the time I'm working off context, and if they're completely natural and using their body naturally and using even their throat, you know, when people get really nervous, their throat muscles actually constrict, and it really restricts them. And I'm reading this too, they actually don't call it lip reading anymore, they call it speech reading, because we're literally the whole thing we're looking at. So if you start getting really nervous and constricting your throat, it actually affects my understanding you. So generally speaking, I just let them hopefully calm down. And sometimes having my PhD title, you know, being able to introduce myself as Dr. Helen Willis, helps to kill immediately the stereotypes that are associated with deafness. So deaf and dumb, you know, deaf and can't talk, you know, well, or deaf and have a deaf voice. And, you know, most of my deaf friends do have a slight twang. And even I have a slight twang if I'm particularly tired, especially start hearing it slightly in the back of my voice. And people have thought I was from a different country. You know, are you Austrian? Are you Australian? And I went, no, I'm British. Can't get more British than me. I'm just deaf. So it's trying to navigate that. But most of the time, I just try and let people generally just relax. I try to be relaxed myself and kind of let my body language relax them too. And that generally works. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time.
I can definitely see your strengths and why you must be doing very well in your stress management business, in picking up other people's body language and the stress they're holding in their bodies. That's a great story. What about strengths of the others? I mean, you mentioned, you know, your strengths, but say a little bit more about how you think you can draw on your strengths to mobilize your strengths to help you, and perhaps how you can use them with other people.
If I may, I think the choice, I think the three of us as a cross section of alumni, you know, I think the three of us between us probably cover everything we really need. You know, we have three very different disabilities, and we have the strengths which complement them. And I think, you know, everybody. I mean, I say this a lot. My partner has absolutely terrible eyesight. He won't let me say that. Without his glasses, he is pretty much blind. And I use this as an example. He isn't classed as disabled. He isn't classed as blind, mainly because so many people, it's a pure policy decision. So many people in this country would be classed as disabled if wearing glasses counted. Then it would be really inconvenient, and we'd have too many disabled people. Everybody has disabilities. It's just it is a spectrum, and if you fall far enough along that to have an impairment which society considers you to be debilitating, then you are classed as disabled. But everyone has strengths and weaknesses. When I was a child, my teacher would sit me next to my dyslexic best friend, who read medicine at Lincoln, Oxford. But when we were 8 or 9, she sat us together because Bridget could take the tops off my pens, which I couldn't do, and I could help her with spelling. And if she sat us side by side, then neither of us asked for help. We were complementary, and I think that is very much how to perceive disability, is that the compensating factors that we have to learn. And I don't, when I say we, I don't mean we disabled people. I mean, we all people. We all of us have strategies to overcome the things that we can't do. You know, I have my sister-in-law is the same height. She's able-bodied, but she's actually the same height as me. She's just over 4 foot tall. They have a step ladder in their kitchen. Now, she's able-bodied. That's not, so that step ladder is not classed as assistive technology. It's a step ladder. But she has a way of overcoming the thing she cannot do, which is to reach the top cupboards. We all compensate, and we all learn to compensate with the things that we do not do well.
Thank you. Deb, you already, I think, alluded to this in relation to your sort of career choice and so on. But you've thought about the concept of neurodiversity, I guess, quite a bit. Do you want to say a few reflections for us?
Yeah, so some conditions, including autism, bring, I mean, as Ruth also mentioned in relation to her condition, can bring particular strengths. So for me, I have, the way I think is very particular and has been really helpful in my work. And I received lots of positive feedback from colleagues about my logical, structured way of thinking and my focus on detail, my ability to look at things from lots of different angles and make links between things that other people don't, where people don't see the connections. And this has really helped in some of the IT projects I've worked on, both in designing IT systems and in thinking through the steps we need to go through in the project to achieve our goals. So in a work context, it's been really helpful. And I've been fortunate that a particular manager identified many of those strengths and directed me into data architecture. And then in a personal context, one of my other strengths that potentially comes from autism is that I really absorb information and memorize information extremely effectively. I've got a brilliant memory. This, I think, is actually what's enabled me to develop the relationships that I've developed, because as I talked about earlier, that's taken a huge amount of active, proactive effort. And I've done that by learning how to react and interact in different situations, literally what to say and what not to say. And then compare a situation now with one in the past and think, well, that worked then, so I'll do that now, or I shouldn't do that because it didn't work. I'm literally consciously thinking about how to interact and react in particular situations with people. And a lot of that's become more second nature now, but for a long time, a lot of it was extremely conscious. And I really put that down to my ability to learn and remember and apply in comparable situations.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, I mean, we should wind up this part of the discussion, I think, in a moment, but maybe you could all just say, maybe give us a bit of advice about how to help people get into the workplace from the perspective of your own experience. So Helen, you're in your sort of second non-academic job in a way. Do you have reflections on how bold to kind of start your own business?
I just, it was a bit of a long winding path to where I got. I think the main thing is do what's right for you. You know, really listen to what your, for want of a better word, it's such a corny word, but passion, you know, follow your passion. If you're really interested, really connected with what you're doing, then you're going to be so much happier. And that means you're going to be so much more effective and actually be more successful. And that attracts more success. So, because I did start initially thinking about being an academic and then finding that a very intense kind of career path for me in terms of information processing. It was information processing like 10 times, 100 times even at times. And then I went into the university working environment, but working behind the scenes in student support. And that was quite gratifying. But again, I wasn't really able to get to where I felt I was needed, which is in terms of stress management. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to make the jump and start up my own business. So the main thing for me is to really do what's right for you, listen to your gut. And people don't listen to their gut enough these days. They kind of follow expectations or it's so much easier to kind of do what other people advise. And sometimes, although the advice is very much spannable and welcome, sometimes it's not quite right for you. Just follow your gut. And I just followed my gut all the way, and I learned to listen to my gut more and more because it hadn't let me down. And actually, funnily enough, doing my hypnotherapy qualification made me even more convinced in the power of listening to your gut, because it's all about the subconscious, and there's a lot of power we harness, and the subconscious is a very much an unexplored arena. And the argument there is you have all the resources you need, you just need to work it out for yourself, and then you can proceed. So that's kind of my unconventional answer to that question.
I suspect the others agree with you. Do you think these are personality factors?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say if I were advising a disabled person, it would be to really understand other people. Well, actually, it's true for both ways around. You really need to understand other people's experiences, because you can't create a level playing field if you don't understand what you're trying to match. And I think so. Definitely thinking about my time at college and my early career, I was, and everybody around me was trying to make it look the same, rather than trying to experience the same. And I think I would say, rather than trying to, I mean, the classic example I use, I never went in the college TV room. People talk about things that went on in the TV room, and I don't even know what I've never been in there. I don't know what it looks like. I cannot envisage that. That doesn't matter. And people who tried to get me in there, lots of people are like, yeah, we can make a ramp. We can get you. It doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. What matters is the experience, the interactions. I had all those interactions, just not in one particular venue. And I think in terms of supporting a disabled student or a disabled person in the workplace, the question needs to be, what is it you're trying to achieve, and how can we help you to achieve the same, not do the same. Because experience is an achievement. To have an experience is you achieve an experience, or a piece of work, or a level of understanding. And I think that assumptions about what someone else is experiencing without actually asking them and talking to them is a massive barrier. That is the key barrier. Whereas asking somebody, what is your experience? My mum, when she was an administrator at Cambridge, had a student who had a condition that had never been identified to do with his eyesight, and he got basically the muscles in his eyes gave up after a very short period of time, and he learned to read 10 times as fast as everybody else, and he never understood until his postdoc. So yes, I think I've been giving his postdoc. That other people did not rest their eyes for 90% of the time when they were reading. And when he was diagnosed, it was a really easy fix. He had a very simple surgery, and he then could focus on the page for the entire hour, which of course meant he could then read 10 times as fast as everybody else. But he didn't know until his condition was identified that other people were not staring at the page blankly out of focus 90% of the time. Now that's a really simple experience that could have been shared, and that could have been identified early on in his education, and it could have been fixed. But he didn't know that he was reading differently to the way other people were reading.
Thank you.
So I think ask the question.
Deb, do you have anything to add?
Well, really to echo Helen's observation about really knowing your strengths and going for roles which work to your strengths. And also then having the courage, and this is really hard, to explain which reasonable adjustments you need, if any, in order to be able to contribute your best. Because if you've got the setup that works for you, then you're going to be most productive for your organisation. And I've done 2 jobs which really didn't play to my strengths. One caused me stress, but I did it successfully. And in one, I was told that I was underperforming. And I had been promoted into that on the basis of my strengths. But then it turned out, in hindsight, it played to all my autistic challenges, which at the time I didn't know were autistic challenges because I hadn't been diagnosed. And so now I will avoid roles like those 2 because I know that they'll be really bad for me. And I'll go for roles which I know will work well for me and I will work well for. So I think that's really important. And that's a process of learning about yourself and what works for you.
Thank you. Well, this has been a brilliant discussion so far. I think we've got one question in the chat, but I'm sure there are others. So for the moment, I'm going to disappear and ask my colleague, Kate Dornick, to come and pose some questions for you. Kate.
Hello, thank you. That was really interesting. Yes, so there's just one question at the moment. So please, everyone else out there who's got questions on their mind, do please enter them. So the first question I've got is from Sarah Jane King, who says she's been reflecting on the challenge of levelling the playing field and how the idea of inclusion is often predicated on helping people with disabilities to assimilate to certain norms. And she was wondering what are ways in which the able-bodied world and its norms could change for everyone to enable a greater levelling of that playing field so that people with disabilities can achieve experiences and live happy, fulfilled lives. So that's, if anyone wants to start on that question? Debbie, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you. So absolutely, I think really the answer's in the question, which is that to the extent possible, and of course it's not always possible, making things accessible for everybody makes them accessible for the people who have particular conditions, but can also help people without conditions. So I talked before about how I need gaps between meetings. Well, actually, since the coronavirus pandemic has hit and all my meetings have gone online, eventually my department issued guidance to all its staff saying, please make sure you schedule gaps between online meetings so that everyone can get up, move around, get a drink, whatever it is they need to do. Because many people are finding online meetings more draining than face-to-face meetings. Not everyone, I'm sure, but many people. And so that's an example, actually, for me, I'd asked as a reasonable adjustment in this job to have gaps between meetings, but now it's becoming a quasi-norm to enable everyone to function effectively. And the more that we can do things which remove the need for individuals to ask for specific access, the more that those people will be able to participate in life, but actually often it will help everyone to live a more comfortable, enriching life.
Helen, you're nodding along there. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I completely agree with all the above. It's just that so many small adjustments, because sometimes the adjustments you have are not actually that major. That, for example, subtitling on television. Everyone can put on closed captions. And actually, it's quite funny. My parents now, whenever they're watching telly, and they do this normal practice, ever since I was a little child, if I was in the room, they put on the subtitles. Then now they have the subtitles on all the time, irrespective of whether I'm in the room or not, especially if they're watching American shows and they talk so fast, like, blah, 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 and they can't keep up. So it's just those small adjustments. And then for me, also, another layer to add on top of that is to always have this ongoing discussion of how people are feeling. And for me, the buzzword is cognitive load and stress management. Everyone is burdened these days. We live in this incredibly busy, fast-paced, insane world, and it's even more insane with current situation. And we all got our own loads to bear, and it's talking about that and not letting that load become a burden, because I say it doesn't take that much to kind of push you over that edge, and before you realize you start having mental health issues, physical health issues, and things like that. So it's making it situation normal to talk about stress levels, and not thinking, oh, you're just whining, or you're just, I mean, occasionally people are whining and are actually being over exaggerating their feelings, but at the same time, it's kind of that dismissive attitude we need to get rid of that. We just need to make it situation normal, cognitive load. We all have our own issues, and even more so these days, irrespective whether you have a disability or not. That picks up on my own work. I'm working with both disabled and non-disabled people because everyone is affected by stress, but they just don't know. They just need tools to manage, and they need to be able to talk about it. And sometimes just the mere disclosure of, I'm being really stressed right now, is all they need. So just having that conversation.
I mean, interestingly, actually, I had a question of my own even before this, but both of you have said things which have brought it back to me. I was reflecting on the current situation, and of course we're constantly at college and elsewhere trying to bear everybody in our community in mind and make appropriate adjustments. And for all of you with very different disabilities, I can think of ways in which things might have got harder, but also things might have got easier. And I'd be quite interested, because I'm just making that up, but I'd love to hear from you about how the gaps got bigger and how the gaps perhaps got smaller in different ways as a result of the pandemic. Ruth.
I have to say, when I was 7 or 8, I came up with this brilliant idea that my life would be a lot easier if I could stay at home and I could have a robot that went out and went to the difficult places I couldn't get to, and so I could interact on a screen, a little bit like, if you've ever seen The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon does it. He hides in his room and he has a robot. Now, actually, this year, that's what I've been able to do. I can attend every meeting I want to. I don't have to ask for any adjustments. My health has got better. I haven't had to deal with, so cold weather affects me massively. When I get cold, if I wear a jumper, I can't move, so I get colder. If I don't wear a jumper, I get cold. So, and getting cold stops me moving. So I can actually just seize up outdoors. In this environment, it's great. I don't have to deal with any of that. Yeah, so actually, you're absolutely right. Apart from not, the mental health impact of not having social interaction, not physically seeing people, which I thought I'd deal better with than I have. Actually, in terms of my working life, I'm currently running a new Innovate UK funded R&D engineering project, and I'm doing it all from my study. And it's great because I don't have to go to any factories, and I can do it all remotely. So there's no access problem. And it really has leveled the playing field completely.
Do you think any of that will continue?
I hope so. I think people will be more accommodating. I've actually talked semi-seriously about having a PA who takes a tablet to a meeting for me, so that when the access means I can't get there, or when just the physical strain, stress and strain of getting there is too great, I can send an able-bodied person to put me in the room. And we've actually been working through that as an idea as a result of our experience this year.
Thank you. Deb, I'd actually love to know how the online interactions affected somebody in your position.
I've actually, well, so the positive side, in the early days of the original lockdown in the UK in March, I was actually finding, although I found the isolation difficult, the social isolation, I was actually finding, on the other hand, that the reduced interaction with people was helpful, because for me, it takes energy just to be in a room with other people, even if we're not directly interacting. For people on the spectrum in general, often just being around people takes energy. And so the reduction in being around people, or the, in fact, complete absence of being around people, was helpful in one way. However, the isolation really has really affected my mental health, and also the massive sudden change in circumstances, of course, affected everybody. And when the first lockdown happened, for me particularly, sudden unexpected big change has a really big negative impact on me, and that's common for people on the spectrum to find change very difficult. So my well-being has actually been quite significantly affected. I've been having a lot more sort of burnout experiences than previously, much more frequently. So I can't say that there have been many positives for me, to be honest. The online interaction as well, as I mentioned, I find more draining than interacting in person. I can't really identify why that is. I think maybe it's just harder to it's harder to have a sense of connection with people for me online. And I think it takes more energy to try and maintain a semblance of connection when we're not physically in the room, can't see people's body language so much and so on.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to some of the other questions now. So Jessica Kindler asks, who's been the greatest support to you in your life, and how did their support make a difference to you? Helen?
Do you have to just one person? I'll go for two.
Okay.
The first person was actually my audiologist. He was the first person ever to diagnose complete deafness. And it was actually remarkably difficult to prove 100% deafness, no residual hearing in both ears. And he was actually the man who managed to get me to get onto the cochlear implant program, because it was brand new technology at the time. Barely anyone was having the surgery, and you had to be completely deaf in both ears and of a certain age group before you were even allowed to have a cochlear implant, because they weren't even sure the technology was going to work. And he's been present ever since then as my audiologist, and having that rock of support and that faith. And he's just this lovely smiling back with this beard. He's like, Santa Claus with, a brown beard. He's just a real rock of support. And then my second person is my mum. She just was that rod of strength that I needed at all times. And what was particularly brilliant about her was she always listened to what I needed. She took on all the information on board, took all the advice on board, and go, right, okay, that's all very well, but what's right for Helen? And she always thought about what was right for Helen. Okay, she seems to be responding well to that. Oh, that's an interesting thing that's happened just there. What can we do to help that or improve that? Because at the time, it was two schools of thought. Either you were sign only, I had to be literally handed over to the deaf community because I was deaf. And I was no longer hearing, so I no longer belonged to the hearing world. Or I had to be completely oral, talk only, not even gestures wasn't even allowed, lip reading wasn't even allowed. And she thought, why do they have to be these two schools of thoughts? Why do they have to be two approaches? Why can't we just fuse those together? So she did everything. So she broke all the rules. And because of that, I was able to flourish, do what's right for me, and have also the bravery myself to break the rules if necessary. But I always have the biggest respect. So whenever I do break the rules, I do it for very good reason. So yeah. Those are the two people. So sorry, I slightly broke the rules there.
We'll let you off. Ruth, is there anybody you'd like to talk about?
I'm going to break the rules too. I'm going to pick my parents as one. So I'm breaking the rules more. So my parents are, I always said I was born in the right place at the right time to the right people. So my mum was a psychiatric social worker. So understood what I needed. She read PPE at St Anne's, so she had the political campaigning background. She got me into nursery school by ringing a nursery who had never had a disabled child in it before, and did the whole, hi, my daughter's, she's very bright, she's only 3, but she's reading and writing, and she really needs to be in nursery. And she'll be a delight to teach. And they were, oh yes, come along, come and see. And she went, oh, by the way, she's in a wheelchair, and put the phone down. So she got me in, she did that. She learnt the 1981 Education Act better than the LEA, so that she could use it. I was in the first year group with the right to mainstream education, and she did that for me. But of course, she couldn't have done that if she hadn't had my dad, building the power chair that enabled me to be integratable. Because you cannot integrate an immobile child into a mainstream school setting. It doesn't work. So yeah, my parents, obviously, as a one, college, and since college, I would have to say, and I think he's here, Mark Friedland, who saw who I was and saw through the physical impairments that were holding me back, and recognized what I could and couldn't do, and has continued to just be in the background, just occasionally going, yeah, you can do that, that's all right, well done. And also, like, see, I told you I was breaking the rules. I couldn't, now, I have what was jokingly called by a disabled speaker I once heard as an assistive partner. So my partner is the support to me. We work as a team. I have skills that he needs, and he has skills that I need. And as a result, we can both function better. We are greater than the sum of our parts. And so I couldn't not mention him.
It's interesting how often Mark Friedland gets mentioned actually at these events. I think we need a Mark Friedland event at some point.
We do.
One more question then. Has your disability ever taken its toll on your self-confidence or self-perception? And if so, how have you worked through that? Deb, is that something you can answer?
Yes, so it has done both before and since my diagnosis. So before my diagnosis, I sort of alluded to a bit, my mental health took a heavy toll, particularly once I'd left university, and I became increasingly aware that I didn't have any deep social connections and I was very lonely. And I didn't know then that I had a particular difficulty, and my conclusion was it was just me, that I wasn't attractive in the general sense of the term. I wasn't appealing to people. And so my sense of self became, my sense of self-worth became very low, my self-esteem became very low. And it took a long time to then kind of get out of that. And especially once I got diagnosed, that was a huge revelation. And even since diagnosis, which has been a very positive experience for me overall, and it's been amazing to get a better understanding of why I operate how I do, I'm still holding myself up to standards that actually are not realistic given my condition. Ideas that I should be able to achieve X, Y, or Z, or should be doing A, B, and C. And it's still a work in progress to think actually some of those things aren't realistic for me. Maybe they're not realistic for anyone, I don't know, but they're certainly not realistic for me. And I need to stop comparing myself with people who don't have this condition. So that's a work in progress, but I'm happy to say that I'm very much further along that path than I was a little while ago.
Thank you. I think I should come in now. I'm very conscious of the fact that this discussion could really go on all evening, and also that we've been told a little bit about cognitive load. So may I thank Kate for chairing the questions, and may I invite our senior tutor, Matthew, to come in with a few reflections.
Yes, indeed, President. Thank you very much. Thanks to all our panelists. I found that a really enriching and informative discussion, and really important for the work we're trying to do in the college. And I'll just have a personal note. I was a student undergraduate alongside Deb and Ruth, so good evening, and good evening to you all. It's useful to be thinking about this, especially in the context of a new university guide on supporting disabled students that's just come out. So this is an area that's in our thoughts. That states, as we would all state, I think, that of course we value diversity in the college as in the university, and that we're committed to ensuring that the very best students can flourish in the community that we try to offer. And in attempting to do that, I think it's absolutely crucial that we hear directly from the people involved. So very grateful to the panelists this evening, hearing both about the positive and the less positive aspects of your time at St John's. I think something Ruth said was that the right resources at the right time are key to success. And we heard about note takers and equipment and about physical premises. And it sounds like that side of things one can get right, and it's a fairly simple matter to do it with communication, with resource. I think we heard from Deb and Helen that the practical adjustments are the relatively easy ones. What might be harder is gaps in awareness or understanding, or how people respond and react. And it's incumbent on all of us, therefore, to try to understand and respond to diverse needs. It might be interesting to hear some figures about the college as it currently stands. Understanding and working with the needs of our disabled students, I think, is a matter that concerns all of us in college, everybody in the college community, which is about 1,000 people. And it's something that we try to manage in as tactful and constructive a manner as we can. At the moment, we have 128 students in St John's, enrolled students. That's about 19% of our student body who've stated a disability to us. Of those, around 40 have stated a mental health condition, about 30 a long-standing illness, about 30 specific learning disabilities, smaller numbers for visual, hearing impairments and physical disability. And that mix is an interesting one, and I think it chimes with what we see in the wider university and also in the sector, in higher education in Britain as a whole. We see, I think, these days a higher proportion, especially of mental health and learning difficulty disclosures now. So much so that the University's Disability Service has restructured its service now, so every college now has a designated disability advisor for mental health conditions, so we're working hard on that. I spoke this morning to our disabilities officer about this, and she suspects there are more students with disabilities than those numbers suggest, but that people just choose not to disclose them for a variety of reasons. I think all of you have mentioned that, which is really interesting. Ruth was tweaking about people wanting to keep that choice to themselves of when and whether they disclose a disability to us. Some students maybe don't view their condition as a disability. I think Deb was saying that. And some just don't want any special treatment. But when they do declare it, then it generates a student support plan, and it goes to their tutor and on a need-to-know basis to college staff. And we can try our best to help with adjustments to teaching and learning and exams and accommodation and welfare and study support and sport and all the rest of it. We can also try and promote a culture of awareness, and it was very interesting to hear your reflections on that. Awareness among staff and among students, and extending to all types of disability, including those hidden disabilities that you were talking about. And we view that work alongside sort of parallel streams of work on, for example, race and the gender attainment gap. Oxford's got its challenges. We live in medieval buildings. Those are hard to adapt and expensive to adapt. The TV room's not medieval, Ruth, but it clearly is not somewhere you're able to go. But we're working all the time on the physical premises. But I think many of you said that the tutorial system is a particular strength because it's personalised learning, and because you can build a relationship with a tutor like Mark, who can make adjustments where necessary to give each student the scope to excel. I think that's a real strength in Oxford and something that we can really continually work at, but something that gives us a good platform, I think, to build on. And Deb was talking about when academic disciplinary cases could maybe generate a concern about a hidden disability. And I think we always try to explore the welfare angle with students when we see an academic wobble. And that's a really interesting point you made, to think in terms of disability as well. So thank you for that. Just a final note, there's a question about the pandemic, and we heard about how that's in some sense has been a levelling experience. Just as one note in that, some light it cast on the question of disability came when a university rule came in that it's mandatory to wear face coverings, masks, in all indoor contexts. But of course there's an exception for people who can't wear them because of disabilities. And at the same time, the Disability Advisory Service made it very clear to us that we can't ask people why they're not wearing a mask. And that generated some challenges for the people running indoor spaces in college, our catering staff, our librarians. No one wants to offend anybody, but they have a responsibility to other users to check that the face covering policy is being upheld. So that was really sort of an interesting small example of an area with some challenge in it. And happily, it seems to be working out through a combination of messaging to students and staff. And I think, importantly, a sense that we're all trying to work together as a community. And that goes back to the culture of awareness point that was raised. And I hope offers a hopeful note that's applicable more widely to the question of disability in college. So I found that a really enriching conversation. I'm very grateful to you all. And thanks very much for giving your time to come and speak to us.
Thank you, Matthew. It falls to me now to wind this evening up. We've heard from three really extraordinary women, and I know that were we in a live auditorium now, we would all give them a very warm clap. I've learned a huge amount from talking to the three of you. From college's perspective, I think many of the things we can do are quite concrete, but what you really, I think, taught us is really, it's much more abstract than that. It's in our attitude. It's in enabling you to be authentic, to listen to and respect your experience, and to also allow you to be proud. We'll take those messages away. I hope this is just the start of a conversation with us. And I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for giving up your time this evening. May I also thank Jenny Dement, who has organised the webinar, Denise, who has been posting captions, Kate and Matthew for their support. And I hope to see you all when we do resume in the real world for the finale of the 40 Years of Women, which will be hopefully a very nice occasion. But thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.